Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. We now have one final session before we have drinks and awards and all sorts. So we're going to tackle the topic of leadership during times of difficulty and particularly change, which we've all experienced a lot of over the past 5 years. For this, we've brought together two of the UK's best video game studios, one big, one small, to share their experience on the subject. So please welcome Rare Studio Head Craig Duncan, Chief of Staff, Chief of Staff Harriet Manson, Dlala CEO AJ Grand-Scrutton, and COO Gemma Foster. I'm going to ask you all an individual question so that people can sort of know who you are. Harriet, you're Chief of Staff at Rare. What does that mean?
It's a really good question. So this isn't original. I read this from a Chief of Staff in another industry across the pond, but I thought she summed it up really well. So if you imagine Chief of Staff, COS, she defines it as C for culture, O for operations, and S for strategy. And I think on any given day of the week, I could be looking at any or all or none of those things. That's an unhelpful answer, but hopefully sort of summarises the breadth and, often scale of what I look at on any given day.
And you come from outside of games, sort of, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah. So I came out of hospitality. So I worked for Hilton Hotels for about 5 years, initially in the European HQ, then in the Asian HQ. So I've had a sort of multinational experience there. 10 years before joining games, spent in marketing, mostly in the digital space, and took a chance on a posting on LinkedIn when I saw this role come up at Rare. Spent a lot of time during lockdown playing Sea of Thieves. Thought I'd give it a go. Didn't think I'd be sitting here, put it that way. But I am. So that was my origin story in a very, very quick nutshell. Yeah.
Craig, you've been part of Rare now for 150 years.
14, but it
14
feels like
years.
That.
It would tell us that it doesn't feel like that, actually. It feels really recent, but you've been a long time. But tell us about your history. You've been in games for a while now.
Yeah, so I think I've hit my 23rd year in games. And just bridging into this panel, I think it's less and less about how long you've been doing it now, and more about the rate of change that's going on today. Like and I've sat on panels before. I think I've learned more, changed more, adapted more in my role in the last 12 months than I've done in the previous 10. And the rate of change keeps getting faster, and I feel I need to keep getting better at everything I do all the time.
Well, that sounds exhausting, and I'm sure...
That's fun. It's fun.
I'll come on to that, though. Gemma, hello.
Hi.
Tell us about yourself.
I'm COO at Dlala now. I joined nearly 9 years ago. Actually joined as number one producer for the studio after they'd sort of landed the first big deal, and they needed somebody to organise them and make things happen. When I joined, there was like 7 of us. Now there's 42 PAYE, so we've slow growth, but we've grown. And my role was kind of shifted over that space as we've grown, and we've obviously had to focus on the change and all the other areas that you have to as an ever-growing studio, as much as AJ probably hopes we don't grow too much more.
Yeah. Well, is that true, AJ? Tell us about yourself. I think you're quite a figure in the games industry.
Thank you.
It's the beard. That's what it is.
I'm AJ, so I'm CEO of Dlala Studios. I've been in games now for about 17 years. Started Dlala 12 years ago. It was originally myself and my partner in crime, Craig Thomas. Cliche, 2 of us in my mum's garage. We'd quit our jobs. We had no money and no plan. As Jam said,
It's not the worst you call me.
Definitely not. Oh, I've already seen a panel about that. I've got to be careful. 12 years later, 43 kind of full-time staff members. My role is I'm director and writer on our games, and I'm CEO, but Gem really runs the studio. I just take all the credit. That's me.
All right, great. Well, let's talk about the topic then. We live in the world of the new never normal. But I'm going to ask, what does change mean? It's quite a funny question, this one, but what does change mean to you? Do you want to start, Craig?
Yeah, I think change is ever constant in life right now. And whether we want it to be or not, or whether we like it or not, that is a thing. I think the journey I've gone on as a leader is to recognize just because I'm comfortable with change. So I'll be like super honest, I love change. Like I am 50% optimist, 50% anarchist. So when stuff's changing, I'm in my happy place because that's when I can go do things differently and change things. The lesson it's taken me a long time to learn as a leader, and actually Harriet was super helpful when she came in her role and helping me learn this, is not everyone is the same with that. So whereas I'm going around and going, hey, isn't change awesome? And isn't like all these opportunities that change creates, that's, for some people that is infectious and that works. For a bunch of other people, that's like, why is our boss being crazy? And actually, I'm really worried about stuff right now. And how do we sort of draw the gap between how people think about change? But change, and I'll stop talking, I think change, it isn't the change that's the problem, it's the disorientation that change feels like that actually I think is the topic. So change happens to all of us all the time, our lives, our worlds, our jobs, our projects, but how you feel, and actually change can feel pretty disorientating. And if you're ever disorientated, you need something to orientate to. And that's, I think, the job as a leader is like, okay, we're all disorientated, what are we going to go orientate to?
Harriet, what's it mean to you?
Is that me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's, actually listening to the first panel this morning about sort of the ways that different generations feel about work and the different expectations that they have. I think there's a large part of today's workforce that has only ever really known tumultuous periods of change. So if I think about even, people around my age, so I'm in my 30s, we kind of got sort of released into the world of work just either during or just after the 2008 crisis. And the doom and the gloom of everything sucks for you guys, you're never going to buy a house, and there's sort of that rapid sense of you're just looking for something tangible you can hold on to and feel that sense of security and that thing that kind of anchors you to the ground. And that's continued in many ways. There's highs, there's lows. Pandemic was crazy level of change. I think a lot of us would look back now and go, yeah, it was really difficult at the time. I think a lot of good, if I think about the world of work, has come from that. And we touched on that this morning, right? Gen X and the Boomer generation have benefited from the changes that the younger generations have sort of asked for, having been put through the biggest change many of us can ever imagine. And I think to Craig's point, it is that feeling of disorientation. I think there are obviously exceptions to change being a good thing. If I think about your personal life and bereavement, things like that. But thinking in a sort of a work context, a period of change gives you a lot of opportunity to look at the business, how people are feeling, are your processes working? Can you get under the skin of things because you've been given the opportunity to look at things in a different light? So it's, I think, one of those things, it's true of a lot of in business and in life, is of bringing people on that journey with you, make them feel that they have a steady hand at the wheel. It's going to feel a little bit bumpy. We always struggle to get through anything without a Sea of Thieves sailing pun. And I think it's as leaders, it's how you help people feel that sense of trust in you, that you'll navigate the period of change with them, you'll keep them informed, you'll try and help them feel less disoriented, but also understand that from any period of change can come opportunity and progress as well.
Yeah, well, AJ, do you have anything to add?
Oh, God. Now we've got to follow that. I think you covered a lot there. I think no, it's true. And I think the opportunity thing is, as much as it can seem a bit cliche that we have to reflect on things, actually, let's use this for the power of good and let's figure out how we make... I think that's the point, is that you've got so many different types of change. Some of them are things that are imposed or kind of thrust upon us when we least expect it. We don't know it's coming. And that's unpleasant. And that is the fact, right? It doesn't matter if you're a leader. It doesn't matter where you are within an organisation or in your own personal circumstances. Those things are not nice. And so in that instance... it's about, yes, hoping that you can get some good out of it, but kind of helping with that reorientation, about making people feel secure. And then we've got the change that we affect and we want to affect. And sometimes that's off the back of negative things too. So I think quite often it does have this kind of underlying kind of negative tension to it. But we also do have the other side of it, which is, about who do we want to be as a studio, and, what do we want to achieve as a studio, and how are we going to get there, and how do we need to change to get there, and what do we need to give our staff and, our line managers and all the different, people to get there. So I think it's hard because not all change is going to feel good. And I think we have to find the opportunities in those scenarios as much as kind of getting it done. Because obviously, especially for a lot of people in this room, changes, and we've got some imminent ones that I'm sure we're all feeling a little bit stressed about. It's legal. It's, and again, there's implications to that. So I think there's categories of it, and some of it I think we all love, and others I think we all don't.
Sure, I might as well just go because I'm going to seem stupid. No, I mean, yeah, look, I'll just be repeating everything anyone else said. I think the key thing for me is that, change is the most important driver to get to success, but it's also quite often the most terrifying thing that's happening. And I think they're not mutually exclusive. I think it's just reality. Like, as Craig said, change is always happening. We can't stop it. And it's all about kind of being able to lean into it and sometimes just understanding that, I can cope with this fear. How do I help everyone else cope with their fear?
Well, let's talk. Gemma's talked about the two types of change we're going to touch upon. The first one is the change we can't control, right? So it's the wider economy, I guess. It's what's going on in the world. It's the pandemic. I guess was something we couldn't control, which for some is the hardest thing to deal with, right? And I guess it's also the hardest to actually navigate yourselves. But what role does a company play? What does leadership in general play during those moments of forced change, I guess?
Cool. I don't mind jumping in to start. I'll probably say something wrong and then you can correct me because you'll be right.
It's a change, though.
There you go.
It's learned. That's good.
I think that's super interesting because it sounds like a closed question in some ways, like there is an answer, but I don't think there is. I think the reality is that the companies, and in which case, especially for us, that's us. Like, it's a C-suite team, the four of us, we are the kind of the company from that perspective. We're often terrified of this change, right? We're realising this stuff. Sometimes we're finding out about this stuff at the exact same time our junior staff are finding out about this stuff. And I think for us, our responsibility at that point becomes twofold. It becomes, what do we need to do what's best for the company? How do we keep the company alive? How do we make sure that the company survives whatever is happening? And then at the same time, it's how do we help all these people through? There is 38 people that aren't on the strategy team. 38, is that maths? Thank you. There's 38 people that aren't C-suite, and it doesn't matter, even if we have no power over government change, right? But the team need to know that we're here and we're going to do everything we can to protect them. And for me, when there is this imposed change, whether that be contract cancellations or new government stuff or lockdown, the team have to have faith that even if we don't know what the answer is right now, we're going to do everything we can to find that answer, and we're going to do everything we can to protect them. And from my standpoint, that is what my job is. My job is I get to panic. I can go panic at home. I can cry into Hugo's fur. He's a pug, not a furry child. But my team need to know, look, I am scared. I'm stressed like you all are, but I'm going to get us through this the best I can. And all I care about right now is you and protecting this business and protecting all of you. And from my standpoint, that's what our role is in any change, but especially the really, really scary stuff.
And do you have to communicate, because Steve did he had a slide on his session, which was around, even when you don't know, you kind of have to tell your staff you don't know.
Yeah, I think transparency is important, but I think you need to filter that transparency. I'm always very honest with the team, and the team always know they can ask any question, whether that's about the finances, anything, and I'll answer it. But they don't always need to know everything that's going through my head. I mean, I probably tell them more than I should anyway. I think it's important, though, in those moments when you get together and you do let them know, yeah, this is scary. Everyone has a right to feel however they're feeling. I feel scared about this, but I'm on it. You don't need to worry about me being scared. I don't want you sitting there at your desks going, oh my God, AJ's panicking. Just know that I'm taking this seriously and I'm going to go figure this out. And that's the level of transparency they need. They don't need the reality, which is...
And from that, actually, a good thing that comes from it, well, based on our experience so far, is the trust builds, right? Because I think, you're opening up and you're showing that vulnerability yourself, and then you go through something, you come out the other end, hopefully, intact, people are good, and then they build a trust in that. So then each time these things happen, we're moving along the journey in times of like everybody feeling that they can have trust in each other to get through it. So I think some good will come from it at the end.
And I think if we're talking now about like the macro climate that we're in, it's undeniable that we see, inflation where it is, that we see more redundancies in our sector than we've seen for some time. Those things are all true, and people spend a lot of time online and they spend a lot of time reading about this, and it becomes a kind of ever-present anxiety. And I think one thing that is very human, and we all do it, is we tend to see some headlines, hear some anecdotes, and we internalize it and go, what's the worst thing that could happen to me personally? Am I going to lose my job? What knock-on impact does that have? My livelihood, my kids, my house, whatever it is. And those are very real human things to fear. And I think we recognise that you can't work in this industry and not have seen those fears play out in some cases, right? And so I think we kind of see it as our job not to deny that reality and not to deny the way that people are feeling. And feeling anxious like that, I think everybody responds to it in really different ways. For some people, it can be a really, really big distraction, right? And they go, I can't focus on work. And, talking about personal days off and stuff earlier, some people, it really, really does spin them out. And for other people, it's a kind of, I'm going to do what I can do here, and I'm going to just get my head down and really bury into a piece of work and go into, hyper-focus mode. And we sort of have to account for all of those feelings and responses to that. And I think we've just taken it, it's a serious responsibility as a leadership team to not deny people's feelings or deny the reality that they're in, but to provide that trust, that sense of we are, here to keep making games. We want to do everything that we can, to still be here in Rare turns 40 next year. Hopefully we're still here in another 40 years. So I think it's building that high trust, exactly to your point, making sure people know that they can come and talk and that their concerns, their fears are real, but trusting that we as the leadership team kind of know what we're doing to a point.
And if we don't, we'll figure it out.
Well, exactly. And I think that's it. There's been many a challenge, like certainly even in my time with Rare, where we are figuring things out on the fly a little bit, but even if people pick up on us figuring out on the fly, hopefully they kind of go, oh no, we trust this lot. They can steer the ship. Again, another one. There'll be more.
Yeah, I think, and you just made me think about, and everyone in this room went through some version of the pandemic and transitioning in and out of the pandemic and during. And I think many times we stood in front of the studio and hey, I've built a lot of games, I've run a lot of businesses over the years. I've never steered a company through a pandemic before. And just making that statement as a leader of so I have nothing more to it. I can't go pull on previous. The last time I managed through a pandemic, here's what we did. Because no one had done that before. And I absolutely echo all the points. Just this statement about what's in our control and what's out of our control, I think is very powerful when you're leading through change. Because ultimately, I think everyone wants to help. Everyone wants to do no one wants to look at change and say, hey, I want to feel a victim of it, or I want to feel at the other end. They want to know what they can do to help. And for me, it's I can't fix the country. I can't fix the industry. Chris and the team here are doing a great job bringing everyone together. We can maybe fix the industry. I think that's probably fair. What I can do is make sure we run a really good company. And what I can say to my team is hey, let me worry about running a really good studio and setting the business practices and predicting the future. And what I need you all to worry about is making great games. And it's really about we've all got to bring our best to bear. And in times of high change or economic distress, we've all got to do our bit. Me going and reviewing the art of the game or our engineering process, probably not the best use of my skill and experience. But there's people in my team that have to do that. And the final thing I'll say, just on the what's in our control, what's out of our control, I heard a phrase, we had a leadership offsite a couple of months ago, and I heard the phrase, pushing the boundaries of what's in your control. And I really like that, because I think that, again, is important in times of change. Like, is this thing really happening to me, or can I sit down with the leadership team of a project and actually influence the way I'd like it to work, so I've got some good ideas and I can actually contribute some more value. So just, as you, and many people have said this better than me, we employ really incredible, smart people in all our organizations. Like, how do you give them a bit more control, or allow them to push on, the way we do things, which is change, but they're then a part of making it better.
You've all touched upon this idea that change, obviously, you're talking about supporting your teams during these changes and managing your teams, but you're going through these changes as well. And we've had a few sessions, a great session from Emma actually earlier, just on this subject. How do you balance your own well-being and your own, alongside your responsibilities to try and make it look like you've got your shit together, basically?
AJ phones me up.
He's not lying at all. I mean, personally, I don't. Is the honest answer. I don't. Like, the reality is I don't.
He doesn't.
I don't. Because, I'm not saying this is what people should do, but I started Dlala on June 12, 2012. June 22nd, 2012. Oh my God, I'm losing it. 30 days after that, Chris Rickett, who's still with Dlala now 12 years later, joined as our first employee. From that day, I didn't matter anymore, in my opinion. And I'm not saying this is how people should think, but all I think about is I need money to pay people's mortgages, to feed their kids, to keep their pets alive, right? And so when this change happened, I could not give two shits about myself. I honestly couldn't. Because I've always said, as long as I'm breathing, Dlala will exist. Even if it's just me in my mum's garage again, which technically she doesn't own anymore, so it'll be a bit awkward. Dlala will be fine. So for me, I didn't, because I didn't think about it.
This sounds like bad advice, AJ.
That's what I'm saying. It's not advice. It's not advice. I'm not saying this is how you should be. But to answer your question honestly, I can't advise because I didn't. At no point through any of this change did I really care, because I just love making video games with awesome people, and that's kind of what I focused on alongside the going on in my head.
I think it's a challenge though, isn't it? Because, you're in a situation where you're starting a studio from scratch, and that doesn't mean to say, by the way, that if you're walking into something that's already there's not a lot to tackle at all. But I think that's the problem is, you've been on a progressive journey of changing the studio through times of significant change, and that doesn't really give, this particular scenario hasn't really given it, much opportunity to sort of take a breath. But me, Ben and Rag, who work with AJ, endlessly try to convince him that he should take some of that time. And I think that what we do is we support him without realising without him realising we're supporting him at times.
I mean, I don't do it all on my own.
And I think that, what it really goes into is what, everybody touched on, Craig mentioned this as well, is about having great people working with you who can take some of those burdens as well. And they get plenty out of it, because there's lots of people who want these opportunities. They want to grow, they want to learn, they want promotion, they want to make great games. So there's lots of people around that you can start to shift that on. And I think as time has moved, you're trying to basically turn it into, if you've got those people around you, hopefully what starts to happen is they'll say, oh, AJ, by the way, this is going on and that's happening, but these are the things we're doing, or this is what we've already done. We're just letting you know. Do you have any kind of feedback or comments? And he'll be like, oh, no. But the point is, it's one less thing to worry about. But I think that we're still very much where our studio's at, in that kind of transitional period of bringing in those people and getting that experience that allows you to maybe one day have some respite.
Maybe delegate.
Yeah, I guess, in my experience, there have been so many weeks, and I still haven't learnt my lesson, when I've got to my desk on a Monday morning, looked at my calendar and been like, oh, I've got some time to do some stuff this week. Cool. I'll actually do my, midterm long-range projects. Then, by 1 o'clock, 10 meetings have gone in throughout the course of the week. Suddenly my priorities and my focus have to shift. And a lot of change has happened in the last, probably the day I walked in 3 years ago, which makes me feel like it might be my fault that so much has changed around us. Maybe I was the omen. But, really recent example for me, July turned into one of those months where, suddenly my fairly quiet month where I could really put my head down and focus on some sort of important projects, but they'd been put on the back burner because there's always something more urgent. Turned into one of those months where suddenly there was just everything needed attention. They weren't, fire drills or anything like that, but it was just going to be a really busy time. I was also trying to move house throughout that whole month. And that in itself turned into a kind of uncontrollable beast too. You assume things are going to go really smoothly and then the boiler doesn't work. And actually, I think the carpets need to be replaced too. And when suddenly you're just in this world of, I don't genuinely have enough hours in the day to do everything. And I just had to be really honest with Craig, and I just had to say, I'm not going to be firing on all cylinders for the next few weeks because I don't physically think that I can, even if I push myself to, max out on what I think I can do. It's just not going to be the case. So I kind of sit with Craig and I go, here's the sort of high priority stuff. This stuff I'm going to, I've got an amazing team. Like they'll be picking that up in the background. So I think it's, work-life balance was mentioned earlier. Sometimes there's no work-life balance at all because the work's tough, the life's tough, and you're just kind of running on empty a little bit. But I think for us, we've just always had a really good, open kind of team culture of just being able to say, got stuff going on at the moment. So that's been really helpful for me just to know I've got backing when life's busy as well as work. I don't know if I've gone off piece from your question there, Chris. Yeah.
No, and so I'll let Craig talk in a second. I think both of you, what you were saying is surround yourself with other leaders who can support you and help you during these sort of moments. I love Craig made a joke when I asked AJ how does he cope with these moments, and Craig went, "You call me," which is also my strategy. Yeah. Go on, Craig. Sorry.
I think the point, and I'll poke at AJ a little bit more just because it's fun and hopefully it creates a few laughs in the audience. That sounds like bullying at a HR conference. I shouldn't do that. But I get what you say there. Like as a leader, you feel the burden, you feel the responsibility. In times of change, you take that on yourself. Like I used to be that. Like, so there's hope for you. That's what I'd say there. I think the bit I've learned to work on over the years is it is about sharing that burden. But to answer your question directly, Chris, it's like you've got to find those other things that center you. So for me, it might be like going and taking the dogs for a walk because your dog doesn't care how important that email is or how much the financial pressure's there because it wants to go for a walk. So you go for a walk and it just does that thing that lets your brain subconsciously kind of think things through. Or, I'll drive home and listen to heavy metal music really loud in the car because it takes me back to concerts and just the stuff I love. Or watching your favorite movie, like you've got to, almost in the times of highest pressure and stress, you've got to have those things that center you. And I kind of encourage you all to think about what those things are. Like who, say, what's that favorite piece of music? Who's that person that you want to talk to that whenever you talk to them actually makes you feel it's probably going to be all right? But then the flip side of that as a leader is you can't just tell it and again, it took me a long time to learn this. You can't just tell everyone, dealing with change isn't telling everyone it's going to be all right. Because if you think it's going to be all right and they don't believe it's going to be all right, you telling them that is not managing them through change. Yeah. They're just going to go, okay, Craig's not worried about it, but I still am. So clearly he doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah. I'll rattle on to the next other part of change, which is the ones we create. Perhaps it's a change in direction of a project. Perhaps it's change of personnel, a change of strategy, change of structure. What's the key thing to remember as leaders when you make these sort of changes? Let's go first.
I think, obviously, it can be, that's, theoretically, it could be anything. But I think one of the biggest things is to not be short-sighted. I think, on the note of change being kind of ever going and just continuous and so on, it can feel like a really good idea to be like, right, we're going to do this thing. We're going to make it happen. Let's do it. And don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing. But I think with everything you do, think that and then think, okay, so what is the impact of this thing that we're doing? And how does that feed out into other ways and other things that we also need to think about? It doesn't mean don't do it. It just means do it properly. And then I think it's about thinking, this thing that we're doing in 6 months, what does it look like? If it doesn't work, what do we do? And then kind of making sure that the answer to all of those things is communicated to everybody as well. So they understand, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is how we're going to review it. This is what we, because, and again, I appreciate that's really theory and a bit waffly, but the idea really is, it's just with every type of change, whether it's the type that we're talking about that's kind of imposed upon us or whether we're creating it, that you're always going, okay, this is what we want to do. This is how we're trying to get there. What does it look like now? What does it look like soon? What do we do if it doesn't work? And then making sure that that's communicated. So everybody knows it's well thought out, it's well planned, and also trying to think about the questions you know are going to come back and have those answers. Because it's absolutely pointless trying to convince everybody of something if you can't answer those questions. You've got to be able to answer them. And there'll always be a question, I'm sure, where we go, didn't think of that one. Because, you can't. But at the same time, you go, okay, what are people going to say about this? And what are they going to ask us? So just always trying to be as prepared as possible, but also in the long term as much. And plans may have to change, because they do, because other things change as well. But I think it's that really, it's just always trying to think short term and long term as well.
I'll just echo particularly and totally agree, have a plan and think the plan through with a number of different sort of permutations. But the point of communication, I think, is so important. And I think being prepared as a leader or as a leadership team or as a, org lead to over-communicate that if you have to, because you've probably sat in closed rooms, spent hours talking about the plan and gone, this is awesome, it's going to be great for reason X, reason Y, reason Z. But depending on how that's communicated, how it's delivered, particularly in a world like we're living in at the moment, where people are quite anxious and they are resistant to change because they worry about what that might be bringing with it, landing something without being willing to answer the questions or willing to provide a bunch of context that you might think is superfluous or, surplus to requirements, actually can provide clarity that people, I think, are looking for when things feel difficult or unexpected. I can think of a couple of examples. I won't, go into the details of them, where not just at Rare, but in previous roles, where a kind of what I perceive to be an objectively positive change was met with kind of looks of horror, frowns. Oh, does this mean, catastrophic outcome A? You kind of go, I don't know how you think it could mean that. But the mental gymnastics happen. And particularly at the moment, I think that's people are almost waiting for a bad thing to come out of, of the industry or their studio, whatever it is. So I think it's, for me, it's be willing to over-communicate and be willing to answer questions and probably practice the Q&A before you go into it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the logic of your change doesn't matter and how you communicate it. I know, I think you both mentioned context. Like, context is really important, because if you're communicating change to people, they will think about all the things they're scared might happen. So you're giving someone a new boss, you're changing a team set of priorities, whatever those things are. Which is why I actually think verbal communication is such a strong tool. Like, again, I've worked with some of the smartest leaders in the world that are super logical, highly intelligent, and they'll be like, yeah, I've communicated to change, I sent an email to everyone. And you go, okay, and now I've read through the email, and it's not wrong, it's logical, it talks about the change, might even give a bit of context, but everyone will read written comms with their own fears. So, like, whatever, and that's where you need the dialogue. So it's like, how do you get the dialogue? And that might be a pre-conversation, talking about some ideas. Hey, we might need to make some changes in this area. Here's some of the things I'm thinking. Like, maybe I've had that conversation 2 months before. Then you're like, okay, I've been thinking about, remember that thing we talked about last time? Like, I'm thinking about it a bit more. I want to go make this change here. And then afterwards, like, hey, we've talked about that with the team. How did people land with it? Like, and it seems like you're going way over the top, but the bigger the change, the more you need to do that. Emails, teams for change, bad. Summary.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more question, but I want to make sure we get some audience Q&A in as well. And this is, whatever the type of change we're talking about, whether it's ones we control or we can't, Where does your responsibility as leadership or HR professionals begin and end when it comes to supporting these teams through the change? Because I assume, you're not therapists, right? It's where does it begin and end?
I think that's really hard to answer. Obviously, I'm not giving the HR answer, no offence to HR, which is probably the entire room.
Don't offend HR. AJ, don't do it.
Got a good track record. Yeah, it's hard because I think one of the hardest parts of it, and I think you're right, that we're not therapists, right? But we do want to be there, and it's very easy for a meeting that is a one-to-one talking about worries and concerns to turn into that, and you don't want to necessarily cut someone off and be like, "Sorry, mate, you're not paying me by the hour. Get off the couch." So I think there's no really clear-cut line, but. What I think is very important as a leader is that you know your limitations. You know you are not a therapist and that you are not necessarily qualified to be helping once it gets deeper. So it's about providing those channels if you can. I mean, we have a employee assistance program where our staff can ring that 24/7, speak to qualified counsellors, get therapy recommendations, and so we provide that. And we can pre-warn that service, for instance, when there's stuff coming up, like God forbid if a project was to ever get cancelled again, we could let them know and then let the team know, look, if you want to talk to someone about this, please do reach out. We're here to talk to you about your work concerns, financial concerns, all the stuff that comes from being an employee, and we will support you however we can. But we're not therapists, we're not counsellors, we can't provide that service to you, and we shouldn't be trying. So from my perspective, it's making sure they understand that where we are here to support, but we're not here to provide qualified support that, an actual professional should be providing.
And it's making sure that is filtered throughout as well, because quite often I'll have line managers that come to me with concern about the fact that their reportees are coming to them and they don't want to overstep and they don't want to, but equally so, they're sort of terrified about having to have those conversations. So again, it's trying to make sure, no, you don't come across as standoffish, that it's very important that you are caring, understanding, compassionate, but you need to, make, like you say, you're not qualified potentially in some situations to help. So it's very much then about signposting and offering support and assistance in helping them find what they're looking for. It's not even necessarily, not that you said that, but, call the EAP, they'll help you. It might be about what do you think you need? What do you think is going to help you personally? Because everybody's different as well. You can't give a one-answer solution to anybody who says, I've got mental health issues. There's so much more to it than that. So it could be about actually taking the time as a line manager, as a leader, to actually sort of walk with them. I mean, not literally, potentially, but to find what that is as well. It's not necessarily something we already do. It's something completely outside of that. Be supportive in that way. And I think that's as much as you're ever going to be able to give in that regard anyway.
I think when I look at the same question in a less pastoral context, so maybe more, I'm coming to you, my work's been really difficult recently, I'm struggling to connect with my teammate or my manager or, my org lead and things are tough. And I think a lot of us are wired to try and offer solutions as the first thing that we will do. And I think I've probably felt even more prone to doing that the last sort of year, where I know that people are a little bit more unsettled, a little bit more disrupted. And something I've learned from actually our HR BP, Sarah, is really coaching is an art form. Coaching people through their own thought processes is an art form. Sarah does it for me all the time. We catch up on a Tuesday afternoon, and quite often I'm just I've really struggled with kind of this. I don't know which way to go with it, or maybe it's a communication I need to do about change or whatever it is. And Sarah really offers that space for basically me to figure out the answer for myself, but through questioning and coaching me to kind of see the wood through the trees. And it's something I would love to be better at. So I'm kind of trying to learn from Sarah's style. We've got some really good kind of coaching, mentors around the studio too. So I think that would be it for me, and absolutely echo what you've said on the conversations that are less about work and more about, I'm really struggling, I'm feeling really anxious, I'm overwhelmed, I'm super stressed. I think it's exactly that. It's signposting, showing compassion, showing empathy. And I think, fundamentally those things are more pronounced in our industry. Most of us work in what would still be considered small kind of environments. So, 150, 200 people. You get to know people really well. A studio that's been around for as long as ours, people have known each other for more than half their lives in many cases. So you do really care, and you do really want to help people, and you do want to kind of be that shoulder to cry on. And I think just as leaders, there's a balance to be had where you show people the empathy, the care, but also make sure that people are signposted appropriately and professionally when that's necessary. Sorry, that was a ramble.
Good answer.
Thanks. Do we have any audience questions? I can't see, actually, James. Can you see it all? No audience questions? None at all? Oh, yeah, maybe it.
There's been a bit of a recurring theme that I've picked up on today from a lot of the sort of HR professionals, which is how do I get buy-in or the ear of the leadership team? So would you have any advice for those people to get that empathy and understanding, perhaps like stop looking at the shareholder, say, and look at the people? Any thoughts on that?
Many. Yeah, I think it kind of comes back to what I said earlier about, I think everyone has their job to do. And I think you've got to, and we don't always get this right. There's always areas of responsibility you're trying to tackle together as be that a leadership team, be that as a wider manager community, be that as me as the CEO working with the HR team on things we're trying to do. No one challenge is the same. So I think I'd always try and get into the specifics. So I think when people go, oh, that's a management problem or that's a leadership problem, it's like, well, what actual problem are we talking about? And we do things like, when we have our all hands, our company meetings, we'll have space for Q&A. We will and this sounds super trivial, but I'll go sit upstairs in one of our development barns on my laptop in a totally open area on an afternoon that I know I've got free. And it's when you can have those passing conversations that goes, hey, how's it going? And actually, to sort of push your question back on you, I think you've actually got to separate those divides. And sure, I'm there as the studio head. I'm responsible for running the studio, and I take that responsibility really seriously, and I'm going to work really hard to do it. But that's kind of the role I've got to play, and my team have to play the roles down to all their specialisms. Someone's time to leave. But yeah, so I don't love the hey, it's a leadership or it's a team. I think you've just got to go, hey, we're one rare team. Sure, Craig's studio head, Harriet's chief of staff, Sarah's HR business partner. How do we just use our skills to go solve the problems we need to solve together? And if you've got a point of view on how the studio should run or decisions we should make, come talk to me. I'll be open to that, and I'd love the opinion. And if it's a great idea, we'll go use it.
Yeah, and I'd say just to add on to that as well is similar to Craig, I have open door policy, literally open door. I do open calls, but I always would say lean on your line managers. There's a reason that we've made them line managers, and I think a lot of back and forth happens between internal leadership and the leadership of the studio that people aren't necessarily aware of. And I think sometimes people can feel they've took something to their line manager and then no action has happened, not realising their line manager's been in my office shouting at me for 2 hours and me just being no. So I always say lean on your line managers, unless it's an issue with your line manager, right? And that's a HR thing, which you all know. But yeah, it's not respecting the chain of command as much as it is they are there to support you directly in your roles. They are the people we have said as the C-suite, we have said these are the people best positioned to help you be the best you can be in that role. So always go to them first, unless it is a real big studio head style thing, because they're also very good at managing upwards, which is just such a big skill on its own. That is something that takes years to kind of master. There's lots of jokes between my leadership team that they know the way to word things to me, or game references to make if they're showing me something, because they know I'll get excited. They mention Day of the Tentacle, I'm going to be oh, I'm listening. So, like, you know, there's people here that know how to manage upwards, that will teach you how to manage upwards. But yeah, similar to Craig, though, like, I think all good leadership should always be willing to hear anything from anyone as well.
I think actually what you've just said, AJ, is really good advice generally for the topic here, which is leading through times of change. I think equipping your leaders properly, coaching them through coaching others, helping them manage the change, because it's on all of us, right? I think, you know, it would be weird if it was just you managing communications or managing a change in whatever it was. So really just keeping your leads close to your ideas, your communication plans, is just always going to serve you well through any process or period of change, whether that's something that you've gone and pursued, or it feels like a thing that's happening outside of your studio, but that's causing, anxiety, whatever it might be.
We're almost out of time, and I want to get one last quick round in of tips. So could you offer one piece of advice each to the leaders and the HR professionals in this room today about managing through change?
I'm going to side skirt the question slightly.
Of course you
I think for me, the thing I would always say is the most important thing with change is your team. So your team is what drives change. I'm a better leader today than I was 12 years ago because of the team. Dlala has a better culture because of the team. Because in my opinion, like, the positive change is evolution, and that comes from every new person that comes through the door, physically or not, at Dlala. And so what I'd always say is, like, always be open to just pushing yourself and improving, and looking at every new hire you make as an opportunity for you to make the studio better and yourself better. Kind of answered the question.
Yeah, I think we've touched upon this sort of a little bit throughout, so I apologise if it sounds like I'm repeating it. But I think it's the understanding that change is different to everybody. And so if you've got a particular change, it will be music to one person's ears. They'll just hear it and be so elated. And to another person, it's their worst nightmare for whatever reason. And you might know it's going to be a nightmare for them. And I think having that awareness, and then kind of like we said about like working through those elements. So when we're talking about how we're doing it, and it's not necessarily change that just comes from leadership. It might have been a whole consultation process, this change. It might have involved different departments and because that would be right, and that's what you should do if you can. But it's about, evaluating all those as best you can, because you can't cover everything, and you can't, and you can't make everybody's reality different either. But you have to be aware to make sure that the change happens as smoothly as possible, and that everybody understands how they contribute to that change and sees the opportunities, as cliche as it is, to contribute to that change. I'm always very much about sort of saying, if I know something's not going to go down well with somebody, let's not try and paint it as something different. But we can absolutely say, look, I know you're not going to like this, and I know some of the reasons why, but I also know that this frustrates you and that annoys you, and this is going to help with those things. So let's focus on how we go through those things to make this a good thing. And hopefully by the end of it, they come out feeling more positive about the thing that potentially was a nightmare for them. Sorry, I might have gone off on a tangent a little bit there, but yeah.
Go on.
You keep the last
Okay.
line going.
You stole mine, so I'll give you that. It was a great answer, though. Yeah, I think it's just meet people where they are. And again, I think to echo Gemma a little bit, it's like one size fits no one. So just recognise where people are, and even if the change makes sense to you, it's totally logical, it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing for the business, the right thing for the project, whatever that change is, someone else won't be in that same headspace as you. So you've got to meet them where they are. And I think that's the thing over 20 years of leadership. I think I've adapted the most and just recognise where individuals are, and that I think I'm going to echo what someone else said earlier. Is like every single person is different. Like we purposefully bring diverse teams of amazing people together, so therefore we shouldn't be surprised that everyone's different and thinks differently and brings different things, because I think that was what we tried to bring and design. So therefore, to then go, I'm going to communicate change the same way to everyone, which people do, not by misintent, but just by convenience. Hey, I'm going to change it. I'm going to send an email. So yeah, meet people where they are, be bespoke to that, have the right follow-ups, and let leaders help you manage change. It's not just on one person.
And I think for me, it's maintain consistency where you can. So for me, that is, we are consistent about what are our principles, what are our values, what matters to us as a business, what matters to us as leaders. Those things don't change throughout times of change around us. People expect to come into Rare and be able to come and chat to you, to come and chat to me, to come and chat to our other leaders. That will always be the case. So maintaining that consistency, I think fears feel more real if signals change around you. So if you can maintain consistency in those signals, what feels innate to your culture, to your studio, to your people, maintain that as much as you can, and then do all the other things with the change that we've spoken about for the last hour. And hopefully that process just feels much easier and smoother.
Thank you to our panel. So that concludes the HR Summit portion of our event. And I've learned a lot today. I've learned that 74% of organizations are focusing on well-being to boost retention. That's great. I learned that AI is just a parrot. It'll always need a human component. And sometimes it's just going to make shit up. I learned that Gen Z expect transparency and to know where they're working, what they're working towards. So establish that career architecture. But I've also learned that we're an aging population. I mean, I did know that already, but don't just focus on Gen Z. Build working environments for Gen X too. I learned that 36% of employees trust their company. 36%, that's not great. But trust in challenging times is about saying what you know, saying what you don't know, and setting a time when you'll update your team with more information. I learned that this is a horrible stat, I learned that 98% of HR professionals have felt burnt out and they need to practice saying no. I learned that 80% of the games industry self-identify as neurodivergent, and neurodiverse people often mask who they are to fit in, but that harms productivity. And that neurodiverse people is not a problem to solve, they are problem solvers. And then I finally learned that meet people where they are during times of change. Don't just send an email. Thank you. And we'll be back in here. Thank you to Amicus, our sponsor. Thank you for coming along. We're back in here in an hour for the best place to work.